You are nothing but a thief in a cheap dress. My mother-in-law's voice echoed through the ballroom of the Drake Hotel in Chicago. She slapped the champagne flute out of my hand, sending crystal shards and vintage Dom Perignon flying across the marble floor. "Security," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Remove this trash before she steals the silverware." My name is Riley, and at 34 years old I had just been publicly humiliated by the woman I tried to please for 3 years. My husband James stood right next to her. I looked into his eyes, begging for him to defend me, but he just fixed his silk tie and looked away. He let the security guards drag his own wife out into the freezing snow like a criminal. As the heavy gold doors slammed shut behind me, shivering in the biting winter wind, I did not cry. Instead, I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I dialed a private number. "Initiate Protocol 0, I said calmly. "Cancel the $5 million donation to the Beatrice Foundation immediately. Let the bank foreclose on her house tomorrow." My mother-in-law thought she had just thrown out a parasite. She had no idea she had just declared war on the owner of Phoenix Holdings. Before I tell you how I destroyed their entire legacy in less than a week, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The night had started with such promise. It was the annual Winter Charity Gala, the most important social event of the season for Chicago's elite. My mother-in-law Beatrice was the chairwoman of the committee. For months she had complained that fundraising was down and that her family reputation was at stake. I had quietly arranged for my holding company to cover the deficit, anonymously, of course. I just wanted to see James happy. I wanted to be part of the family. I was standing near the ice sculpture nursing a glass of champagne when Beatrice marched over. She was wearing a red velvet gown that cost more than most people earn in a year. Her eyes scanned my outfit with pure disgust. I was wearing a simple black dress I had bought off the rack because James claimed we needed to save money for his business ventures. "Who let you in here?" Beatrice hissed, grabbing my arm with a grip like iron. "I told James to leave you at home. This event is for donors and high society, Riley, not for unemployed freelancers who live in my basement." I tried to keep my voice steady. "James said you needed support tonight, Beatrice. I just wanted to help." "Help?" She laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that drew the attention of the nearby guests. "How can you help? You cannot even afford the valet parking. You are an embarrassment to my son. Look at you. You look like the help." "Actually, that gives me an idea." She signaled to a waiter, snatched a tray of empty glasses, and shoved it into my chest. "If you want to stay, make yourself useful. Go bust the tables in the back. Maybe then you will earn your keep." I set the tray down on a nearby table. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a rage I had suppressed for too long. "No, Beatrice," I said loud enough for the table of investors behind us to hear. "I am his wife, not your servant, and I am done letting you treat me like one." That was when she snapped. That was when she slapped the drink from my hand and called security. The bubbly liquid soaked my shoes. The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye was on me. I looked at James. "James, please," I whispered. He looked at his mother, then at the crowd, and finally at me. "You should go, Riley," he muttered. "You are making a scene. Mom is stressed. Just go home." The betrayal hit harder than the cold wind outside. As the security guard gripped my arm, I realized the man I loved was gone. Or maybe he never existed. Standing on the sidewalk, watching the glow of the party I had secretly paid for, I made my decision. They wanted me to be poor. They wanted me to be powerless. Fine. I would show them exactly what power looked like. I ended the call with my CFO and watched the notification pop up on my screen. Transfer canceled. The game was on. To understand why I pulled the plug on their entire financial future, you have to see exactly how they treated me when they thought I was nobody. 2 days before the gala, the family estate in Lake Forest was decorated with thousands of white roses for Beatrice's 60th birthday. Every heavy hitter in Chicago society was there, sipping vintage wine and comparing net worths. I walked in clutching a small, simply wrapped box, feeling that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had spent 3 months on her gift. It was a scarf made of the finest raw silk, and I had hand-embroidered her favorite lilies along the border, using a technique I learned from a master artisan in Kyoto. It was priceless not because of the materials, but because of the time and love I had poured into it. I found Beatrice holding court near the grand piano. "Happy birthday, Beatrice," I said, offering the box with a genuine smile. "I made this specially for you." The room went quiet. Beatrice took the box, as if it might contain a bomb. She tore off the paper and lifted the lid. When she saw the fabric, she did not smile. She reached in and pinched the corner of the silk, with 2 fingers, holding it up at arm's length, like it was a soiled diaper. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "It is a silk scarf," I explained, my smile faltering. "I embroidered the lilies myself. I know they are your favorite." Beatrice laughed, a harsh sound that made the guest chuckle nervously along with her. She let the scarf drop from her fingers, not onto the table but directly into the trash bin next to her. "You brought me a rag," she announced to the room. "Is this a joke, Riley? Are you trying to turn my milestone birthday into a comedy show for my friends? I wear Chanel and Hermes, darling. I do not wear arts and crafts projects from unemployed housewives." My face burned. The humiliation was physical, like a slap. I watched 3 months of my hard work sitting on top of used napkins and discarded shrimp tails. Before I could defend myself, my sister-in-law, Camilla, stepped forward. She was swirling a glass of Chardonnay, looking at me with pity that was clearly fake. "Oh, come on, Mom, be nice," Camilla said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You know Riley has been unemployed for 3 years. Where would she get the money for a real gift? That is probably just scrap fabric she found in a discount bin. We should applaud her for being so thrifty." The guests roared with laughter. Beatrice wiped a tear of mirth from her eye. "You are right, Camilla. I suppose I should be grateful she did not try to knit me a sweater out of cat hair." I stood there frozen. I wanted to scream that the silk alone cost more than Camilla's shoes. I wanted to tell them that I was not unemployed, but rather the silent owner of a portfolio that could buy and sell everyone in this room. But I stayed silent. I simply nodded, swallowed my pride, and backed away. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea they had just handed me the motivation I needed to take them down. Just as the laughter over my silk scarf began to die down, Dante, my brother-in-law, decided it was his turn to twist the knife. Dante was the kind of man who wore 3-piece suits to casual brunches and used words like synergy and disruption without knowing what they meant. He walked over to Beatrice with a swagger that screamed overcompensation. "Happy birthday, Mom!" he boomed, flashing a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He pulled a shiny key fob out of his pocket and dangled it in front of her face. Since some people think handmade trash is acceptable, I decided to step up. "There is a brand new Mercedes S-Class parked in the driveway for you. Consider it a thank you for being the matriarch of this empire." Beatrice shrieked with delight, clapping her hands like a teenager. She hugged Dante, completely ignoring the fact that the car was likely leased using credit cards he had opened in my husband's name. Dante then turned his attention to me. He looked me up and down, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "You know, Riley, seeing you struggle with that gift gave me an idea. My new tech startup is expanding rapidly. We are actually looking for someone to handle the internal maintenance." He paused for effect, letting the room wait for the punchline. "That means a janitor, Riley. $10 an hour. You can come in at night and scrub the toilets after the real employees go home. It is cash under the table, so you do not have to worry about paperwork. It is an honest living, which is more than you can say for your current lifestyle of mooching off my wife's family, right?" The entire table erupted in laughter. Even the waiters looked uncomfortable, averting their gaze. I felt my husband James shift away from me, physically distancing himself from the target of their ridicule. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to throw my water in his face. I knew Dante's financials better than he did. My team had analyzed his company just last week as a potential acquisition target, before we realized it was a hollow shell. "Thank you for the generous offer, Dante," I said, my voice cutting through the laughter like a razor. "But I will have to pass. I would hate to take a job at a company that will not exist in 30 days. I saw your quarterly filings. You are burning cash faster than you are generating revenue. If I were you, I would worry less about my employment status and more about the audit coming your way. The silence that followed was instant and heavy. Dante's smile vanished. His eyes bulged. He slammed his glass down on the table so hard the stem snapped, sending shards of glass onto the white tablecloth. "What did you say to me, you little leech?" he roared, lunging across the table as if he wanted to strangle me. James finally moved, but not to protect me. He grabbed my arm, digging his fingers into my skin, and pulled me back roughly. "Riley, shut up," James hissed, shaking me. "Why do you always have to be so toxic? Why do you have to ruin everything? Apologize to Dante right now for jinxing his business." I looked at my husband, seeing the fear and weakness in his eyes. He was not angry at Dante for insulting me. He was angry at me for speaking the truth. That was the moment I realized I was truly alone in that room. The dinner party eventually dispersed, but Beatrice was not done with me yet. She cornered James and me in the kitchen while the catering staff was busy clearing the crystal glasses. She held a crisp sheet of paper in her hand, her knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. She did not hand it to me. She slammed it onto the cold granite island with enough force to make me jump. "Read it," she commanded, her eyes cold and hard like flint. I picked up the document. It was a formal notice typed on her personal stationery. My eyes scanned the text and my breath caught in my throat. It was a lease amendment. Effective immediately, rent for the lower-level in-law suite is adjusted to $3,000 per month. Payable in advance. Failure to pay will result in immediate eviction. I looked up at her in total disbelief. $3,000? I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. "Beatrice, are you insane? We live in the basement. The heating system has not worked since we moved in. We have to use space heaters in the winter just to keep the pipes from freezing." I took a step forward, fighting the urge to tear the paper in half. James and I have spent the last 2 years fixing that place. We replaced the drywall after the flood last spring. We scrubbed the black mold off the bathroom tiles with our own hands because you refused to hire a contractor. We increased the value of your property, and now you want to charge us luxury condo rates for a dungeon. Beatrice poured herself another glass of wine, completely unbothered by my outrage. She took a slow sip before answering. "That sounds like a tenant problem, not a landlord problem," she said smoothly. "If you want 5-star amenities, go buy a penthouse downtown." "Oh wait, you cannot. Because you do not have a job, and my son is the only one bringing in a paycheck." I turned to James, desperate for him to intervene. "James, please. You know we cannot afford $3,000 a month on top of our student loans. We are trying to save for a down payment on our own house. Tell her this is unreasonable." James looked at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. He rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "Riley, look. Mom has high property taxes. Maybe it is fair market value. We should just pay it to keep the peace." My heart sank. He was doing it again. He was choosing her comfort over our survival. Beatrice smirked, setting her wineglass down with a sharp clink. "You see, Riley, in the real world, you do not get to live for free just because you married into a family. You have been squatting in my home for too long." She leaned over the counter, her face inches from mine, her perfume overpowering the room. "This is my land, and these are my rules. You have 24 hours to transfer the first month's rent. If the money is not in my account by tomorrow night, I will change the locks and throw your cheap clothes on the lawn. Do not test me. I would love an excuse to turn that basement into a wine cellar." She turned her back on us and walked away, her heels clicking on the floor like the ticking of a bomb. I looked at the paper in my hand, then at my spineless husband. That night, lying in the freezing basement, I transferred the money. But I also made another transfer. I moved $10 million from my offshore trust into a liquid checking account. If she wanted to play landlord, I was about to buy the whole neighborhood. The air in the basement was so frigid that I could see my own breath as I packed away the winter coats Beatrice had threatened to throw on the lawn. My hands were shaking not from the cold, but from a mixture of adrenaline and heartbreak. James sat on the edge of our sagging mattress, loosening his tie with a look of annoyance rather than guilt. He did not look at me. He just stared at the wall, avoiding the reality of what his mother had just done. "James," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "you have to fix this. You cannot let her extort us. We are your family, not her. We are supposed to be a team." James let out a long, exasperated sigh and finally turned to face me. His eyes were cold, mirroring the expression his mother wore just minutes ago. "Stop being so dramatic, Riley," he snapped. "You are being incredibly selfish. You know Mom is having liquidity issues with the company. She is stressed out. The least we can do is help her out with the expenses. We are living under her roof after all." I stared at him, unable to comprehend his logic. "Help her out, James? She just demanded $3,000 for a room with black mold and no heat. That is not helping. That is abuse. And where exactly do you expect us to get that money by tomorrow?" James stood up and walked toward me, but there was no comfort in his posture. He looked down at me with pure condescension. "Maybe if you contributed more, this would not be a problem," he said, his voice dripping with resentment. "Instead of playing artist all day, maybe you should sell some of those little paintings you do. Sell your art supplies. Do whatever you have to do. Just stop being a burden and pay the rent." A burden. The word hung in the freezing air between us. I looked at the man I had supported emotionally for years. The man I had secretly been funding through anonymous donations to his failing projects. And I realized something terrifying. He did not love me. He loved having a punching bag. He loved having someone to look down on so he could feel big. "Fine," I said softly. "I will handle it." James grunted, satisfied that he had put me in my place, and turned off the overhead light. He climbed into bed and was asleep within minutes, leaving me in the darkness. I waited until his breathing evened out before I reached under the bed and pulled out my laptop. I opened the screen and the blue light illuminated my face. I logged into my secure terminal, the screen filled with green candlesticks and complex graphs. My portfolio had jumped another 12% since this morning. The cash balance in my primary checking account sat at a comfortable 8 figures. I looked at the sleeping form of my husband, then back at the screen. He wanted me to pay rent. He wanted me to stop being a burden. I typed a quick message to my broker. "Prepare the acquisition papers for the estate at 1204 Lakeview Drive," I whispered to myself as I hit enter. "Beatrice thinks she is the landlord. She has no idea she is about to become my tenant. If they want to play a game of finance, I will buy the whole board." The following Sunday, the atmosphere in the dining room was suffocating. Beatrice sat at the head of the mahogany table like a queen on her throne, cutting into her steak with surgical precision. She had summoned everyone for a mandatory family dinner, claiming she had an announcement that would change the future of the family legacy. I sat next to James, whose leg was bouncing nervously under the table. Beatrice tapped her crystal goblet with a silver spoon, the sharp chime cutting through the silence. "I have made a decision," she announced, her eyes fixing on my husband. "I am stepping down as chairman. James, the board has agreed to appoint you as the new CEO of the company effective immediately." James dropped his fork. His face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. "Mom, are you serious? I won't let you down. I have so many ideas for restructuring." "Hold your applause," Beatrice interrupted, holding up a hand. "There is a caveat. The company is currently bleeding money. We are $30 million in debt. The banks are threatening to pull our credit lines. The only way to save the business is through a strategic merger with the Kensington Group." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The Kensington Group was a banking empire run by a ruthless family known for their aggressive takeovers. "Mr. Kensington has agreed to bail us out and merge our assets." Beatrice continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "But he is a traditional man. He wants to ensure the alliance is permanent. He has proposed a union between our families." She took a sip of wine, staring directly at me. "James, to become CEO and save this family from ruin, you must marry Vanessa Kensington." The room went deadly silent. I looked at Beatrice, then at James, waiting for him to laugh. Waiting for him to tell his mother that she was insane, that bigamy was illegal, and that he was already happily married. But he didn't laugh. "Beatrice," I said, my voice trembling. "James is already married. To me." Beatrice waved her hand as if shooing away a fly. "Oh, please. That is easily rectified. A divorce can be finalized in weeks if we expedite the paperwork. Vanessa brings a $50 million dowry and a banking empire. You bring nothing but debt and embarrassing handicraft gifts. It is a business decision, Riley. Do not take it personally." I turned to my husband. I grabbed his hand, but his fingers were limp. "James, tell her she is crazy. Tell her you are not going to leave your wife for a promotion." James slowly pulled his hand away from mine. He looked at his mother, then at the imaginary CEO title floating above his head. He looked at everything in the room except me. "Riley," he said softly, his voice cracking. "You know how hard I have worked for this. The company is my life. If we go bankrupt, we lose everything. Maybe we can talk about an arrangement." "An arrangement," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He was not saying no. He was negotiating. He was actually considering trading our 5-year marriage for a corner office and a bailout check. James continued gaining a little more confidence as he justified his betrayal. "Look, we have been struggling anyway. We fight about money constantly. Vanessa can help the family. Maybe this is a sign that we just are not meant to be." I stared at him, watching the man I thought I knew dissolve into a spineless coward right in front of my eyes. He was not just weak, he was for sale, and the price tag was cheaper than I ever imagined. I slowly picked up my napkin and placed it on the table. I did not scream. I did not cry. The heartbreak was instantly cauterized by a burning need for vengeance. "Okay, James," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. "If you want to marry Vanessa for her money, I will not stand in your way. But remember this moment. Remember that you had a choice between loyalty and greed, and you chose greed." I stood up and walked out of the dining room. Behind me, I heard Beatrice clink her glass again. "A toast," she said cheerfully. "To the future CEO and his bright new future." They were celebrating their victory. They had no idea they had just signed their own death warrants. Because James needed a $50 million bailout, and he had just divorced the only person in the world who could have written that check without blinking. I stood up so abruptly that my chair screeched against the hardwood floor. I stared at James, waiting for him to take it back, waiting for him to tell his mother that our marriage was not a bargaining chip for a business merger. But he just sat there staring at his empty plate, refusing to meet my gaze. The betrayal was absolute. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, to tell them exactly what I thought of their twisted morality. But before I could utter a single word, a shadow moved in my peripheral vision. It was Camilla. She had been circling the table like a shark, holding a large glass of dark red Cabernet Sauvignon. As I turned to leave, she lunged forward. It was not a stumble. It was not an accident. It was a calculated, precise movement. With a flick of her wrist, she emptied the entire contents of her glass onto me. The cold liquid hit my chest first, soaking instantly into the fabric of my white dress. It was the only formal dress I owned, a simple piece I had saved up for months to buy, so I would not embarrass James at these dinners. Now it was ruined. The crimson stain spread rapidly like a fresh wound, dripping down my skirt and splashing onto my shoes. The room went silent. I gasped, the shock of the cold wine making me shiver. I looked at Camilla. She did not look sorry. She was smiling. "Oops," Camilla said, her voice dripping with fake concern that was even colder than the wine. "I am so clumsy today. I guess you were just standing in my way, Riley. You always seem to be in the way, do you not?" She took a step back, looking at my ruined dress with a critical eye, as if she were judging a piece of abstract art. "But honestly, I did you a favor," she continued, swirling the few remaining drops in her glass. "That dress was hideous. It looked like something you found in a dumpster behind a thrift store. At least now it has some color. Consider it an upgrade." I wiped a droplet of wine from my chin, my hands trembling with rage. I looked at James, my husband, the man who had vowed to protect me. He did not offer me a napkin, he did not yell at his sister, he just sighed as if my being soaked in wine was an inconvenience to him. Then Beatrice spoke up. She did not ask if I was okay, she did not scold her daughter. She pointed a frantic finger at the floor. My rug. Beatrice shrieked, her eyes wide with horror. That is a 16th century Persian rug. You are dripping all over it. She glared at me with pure hatred. Do not just stand there dripping like a wet dog, she snapped. Get upstairs and change into something appropriate. Better yet, put on some old clothes. Once you have changed, I expect you to come back down here with a bucket and scrub the stain out. If that rug is ruined, I am taking the cost out of your food allowance for the next year. I looked at the three of them. The mother who valued a rug over a human being, the sister who found joy in cruelty, and the husband who had sold his soul for a title. I did not say a word. I turned around and walked out of the dining room, leaving a trail of red drops behind me. I did not go upstairs to cry. I went upstairs to make a phone call. If they wanted to treat me like the help, I would clean house. But I was not going to start with the rug. I was going to start with their bank accounts. I did not make it to the staircase before a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with the stale metallic scent of the wine drying on my dress was nauseating. It was Dante. He pulled me roughly into the shadowed alcove beneath the main stairs, checking over his shoulder to ensure Beatrice and James were still arguing in the dining room. His face had shifted completely. The mocking arrogance from the birthday party was gone, replaced by a sweaty, frantic intensity that made him look dangerous. His eyes darted around the hallway before locking onto mine. Look, Riley, he whispered, his voice low and hurried. I saw what happened in there. That was brutal. Mom is out for blood and James is too weak to stop her. She is going to kick you guys out on the street by tomorrow. He paused, licking his lips nervously. But I can help you, he continued, leaning in closer. I can get Mom to back off. I am the only one she actually listens to. But you have to do something for me first. I stared at him, saying nothing. I wanted to see how low he would go. I have a business opportunity that just opened up, Dante said, trying to sound confident but failing to hide the tremor in his hands. It is a guaranteed crypto arbitrage play. It literally cannot lose. I need $50,000 in cash by tomorrow morning to execute the trade. My liquidity is just tied up in offshore accounts right now, so I cannot access it instantly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled business card with a number scrawled on the back. I know a private lender. He does not check credit scores or ask questions. If you go to him and sign for a $50,000 loan, I will take the cash, double it in 24 hours, and give you half the profit. You can pay Mom her rent, buy a new dress, and have a cushion. I will handle the payments. You just need to be the signatory. I almost laughed. It was pathetic. My brother-in-law, the self-proclaimed tycoon, was trying to trick me into taking out a loan with a loan shark because he had burned every bridge in town. He wanted to saddle me with a high-interest debt that would ruin my life just to cover his own gambling losses. I pulled my arm away from his grip, dusting off the spot where he had touched me as if he were the one who was dirty. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice calm and icy. You want me to commit financial suicide to fund a Ponzi scheme? You think I am that desperate? Dante's expression darkened. Do not be stupid, Riley. It is free money. This is your only lifeline. Unless you want to be homeless in the snow, you will take the deal. I took a step closer to him, forcing him to back up until he hit the wall. I suggest you worry less about my housing situation and more about your own freedom, Dante, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I know about the margin calls, Dante. I know you lost the down payment for your new house on that failed NFT project last month. And I know that the Securities and Exchange Commission is currently auditing your shell company for wire fraud. Dante froze. The color drained from his face instantly. I leaned in and whispered, If you ever try to hustle me again, I will send the file I have on your illegal transactions directly to the FBI. Now get out of my way. I walked past him and up the stairs, leaving him trembling in the dark hallway. He thought he was hunting prey, but he had just walked into the lion's den. I stood at the top of the stairs, frozen, as Dante rushed back into the dining room. He did not just walk in. He stumbled in, looking disheveled and frantic, acting as if he had just escaped a crime scene. I leaned over the banister, listening as he delivered the performance of his life. "Mom, James, I am shaking." Dante stammered, his voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You will not believe what just happened." Riley cornered me in the hallway. She grabbed me. She tried to force herself on me. The room went silent, then erupted in chaos. "What are you talking about?" Beatrice screeched. "She asked me for $50,000. Dante lied, his voice quivering with fake trauma. "She said she would do anything for the money, absolutely anything." "She tried to kiss me, James. It was disgusting. I had to push her off. She is desperate because of the rent hike." I gripped the railing, my knuckles turning white. He was projecting his own desperation onto me, using my name to cover his tracks. "I knew it," Beatrice yelled. "I knew she was trash from the moment she walked into this house. She is nothing but a gold digger who will spread her legs for anyone with a wallet." Suddenly I heard heavy footsteps charging up the stairs. James appeared at the bottom of the landing. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He did not ask for my side of the story. He did not pause to think that his wife, who had been loyal for 5 years, might be innocent. He believed the lie instantly, because it confirmed his worst fear, that I was only with him for money. "James, wait!" I started to say, holding up a hand. "Dante is lying. He is the one who asked me for—" My words were cut short by the sharp, cracking sound of flesh hitting flesh. James slapped me. He struck me across the face with the back of his hand, hard enough to knock me sideways against the wall. The sting was immediate and blinding. My cheek burned, but the shock was colder than ice. I tasted blood in my mouth. "You are a whore," James spat, his chest heaving. "You embarrass me at work, you embarrass my mother, and now you try to seduce my brother-in-law. Get out of my sight before I kill you." I slowly straightened up. I did not cry. I did not scream. Something inside me, the last tiny piece of affection I held for this man, finally died. It turned to ash and blew away. I touched my throbbing cheek, feeling the heat rising under my skin. I looked at James, not with fear, but with the detached calculation of a predator looking at prey. I lowered my hand and stared him dead in the eyes. My voice was dangerously quiet. "You should not have done that, James." He scoffed. "What are you going to do? Call the police, go ahead. It is your word against ours." "No," I said, wiping a small trickle of blood from the corner of my lip. "I am not calling the police. Not yet. But you need to know something. That slap just cost you $10 million. James laughed, a cruel barking sound. "You are delusional. You do not have $10, let alone 10 million. I did not answer. I simply turned around and walked into our bedroom, locking the door behind me. He thought I was hiding. He was wrong. I was going to war. I slid the heavy brass lock into place and leaned my back against the cold mahogany door. Outside, I could still hear James shouting, his voice muffled but filled with self-righteous indignation. He was probably comforting Dante, the liar who had just destroyed my marriage with a single sentence. I walked to the expansive mirror above the double vanity sink. The handprint on my cheek was already turning a deep, angry crimson. My lip was swollen where it had caught against my teeth. I looked at the woman in the reflection. She looked battered, but her eyes were burning with a cold fire that had been dormant for too long. For 3 years I had played the role of the supportive, submissive wife. I had hidden my wealth to protect James's fragile ego. I had tolerated his mother's abuse to keep the peace, but peace was over. It was time for war. I reached into the hidden false bottom of my makeup case and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. It was a secure line, encrypted and untraceable, the kind used by heads of state and billionaires who valued their privacy above all else. I dialed a single number saved under speed dial 1. It rang once. Mr. Henderson, speaking, a calm baritone voice, answered immediately. "It is time," I said, my voice steady and devoid of tears. Riley, the lawyer, asked, his tone shifting instantly from professional to concerned. "Is everything all right? Your voice sounds different." "Everything is perfect, Arthur." I lied, staring at the blood on my lip. "I need you to execute the contingency plan we discussed last quarter. The Beatrice Group. I want to activate the hostile takeover protocol immediately." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of a chair shifting. You mean Project Rising Dragon? Riley, are you absolutely sure? That is a nuclear option. If we buy their debt, we are not just buying a company, we are buying their lives. We will hold the deed to their factory, their office building, and based on their recent filings, Beatrice has personally guaranteed the loans with her estate. If you call in that debt, she loses her home. She loses everything. I looked at the bathroom door. I could hear Beatrice's shrill laughter downstairs. She was happy. She thought she had finally driven a wedge between me and her son. She thought she had won. That is exactly what I want, I said, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I want to own every chair they sit on. I want to own the roof over their heads and the ground they walk on. Buy it all, Arthur. Every single cent of their outstanding liabilities. Contact the distressed asset managers tonight. Offer them 100 cents on the dollar if you have to. Just get the paper in my name. But, Riley, the U.S. markets are closed, Henderson argued gently. Markets open in Tokyo in 10 minutes. I cut him off, my voice sharp. Route the transaction through our shell company in Singapore. Use the Phoenix Fund. I want to be the sole creditor of the Beatrice Group by the time they wake up for their morning coffee. I want to be the one holding the axe. There was a long silence on the line, followed by the rapid clatter of typing. Very well, Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper of professional awe. I am initiating the wire transfers now. The paperwork will be digital and binding. By sunrise, you will effectively be their owner. Thank you, Arthur. Do not disappoint me. Understood, Madam Chairwoman. I hung up the phone and washed the blood from my face with cold water. As I watched the red swirl down the drain, I felt a strange sense of calm. James had slapped his wife thinking she was a helpless victim, but he had just declared war on his boss. He just did not know it yet. The sun was shining brightly on the manicured lawn the next morning, but the atmosphere inside the house was darker than a funeral. It was the day of Camilla's baby shower, an event that had cost more than my college tuition. The garden was transformed into a pink wonderland filled with imported peonies and crystal ice sculptures. I was heading toward the back door to escape the madness when Beatrice intercepted me in the kitchen. She was holding a bundle of stiff black fabric. Put this on, she barked, throwing the bundle at my chest. I caught it instinctively. It was a maid's uniform. Cheap, scratchy polyester with a frilly white apron. I stared at it, then at her. Excuse me, I asked, my voice flat. Our catering staff is short-handed, Beatrice said, checking her lipstick in the reflection of the oven door. The agency sent over a replacement, but I sent her home. Why pay a stranger $20 an hour when I have a useless daughter-in-law living in my basement who owes me rent? You are working the party, Riley. Consider it a down payment on your debt. I started to protest, but she cut me off with a sharp look. Do not make me ask James to come down here, she threatened. We both know how that ended last night. Her eyes glittered with malice. She was using my husband's violence as leverage. I looked at the uniform. A few days ago, this humiliation would have broken me. But today, knowing that I had just authorized the purchase of her entire financial existence, it felt different. It felt like a costume in a play that I was secretly directing. Fine, I said quietly. 20 minutes later, I walked out onto the patio, carrying a heavy silver tray of champagne flutes. The heat was sweltering and the polyester scratched my skin. I weaved through the crowd of socialites women who had never worked a day in their lives, offering them drinks. They took the glasses without even looking at me, treating me like invisible furniture. I approached a group near the chocolate fountain. A woman in a yellow sundress turned around to grab a napkin and froze. She squinted at me, confused. Wait a minute, she said, her voice loud enough to carry over the string quartet. Aren't you Riley, James's wife? I saw you at the gala last year. Why are you serving drinks? The conversation around us stopped. I stood there clutching the tray, feeling the eyes of 50 women burning into me. Camilla, who was sitting on a velvet throne opening gifts, laughed. It was a high tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, do not be confused, Bethany, Camilla announced to the crowd, her voice projecting clearly. Riley is just pitching in. Honestly, she prefers it. She has always had a servant as mindset. Some people are just born to serve, right, Riley? She simply likes being the help. Camilla looked at me with a smirk, daring me to speak. The guests giggled, accepting the explanation that I was beneath them. I gripped the silver tray, imagining the sound it would make connecting with her face. Instead, I forced a smile. "Enjoy your champagne," I said, because I knew it was the last expensive drink she would ever taste. I was balancing a heavy silver platter filled with imported caviar canapés, navigating the uneven cobblestones of the patio when disaster struck. It was not an accident. Camilla's prize-winning standard poodle, a creature she treated better than any human being, darted out from under the table. The dog slammed into my shins, tangling the leash around my ankles. I lost my balance. The tray flew from my hands. Time seemed to slow down as I watched $300 worth of appetizers arc through the air and crash onto the dusty stone pavers. The sound of silver hitting stone silenced the entire party. The dog yelped, though I had not even touched it. Camilla gasped, dropping her fork. "Prince, oh my God, did she hurt you?" She rushed to the dog, checking its paws completely, ignoring the fact that I was on my knees scraping gravel out of my bleeding palms. Then Beatrice marched over. Her shadow fell over me like a thundercloud. She looked at the ruined food, then down at me, with a look of pure loathing. "You clumsy, ungrateful parasite!" Beatrice hissed, her voice vibrating with rage. "Do you know how much that caviar cost? That is more than you used to make in a month." I started to stand up, mumbling an apology, but she put a hand on my shoulder and shoved me back down. "Stay there," she commanded. I looked up, confused. Beatrice pointed a manicured finger at the dirty appetizers scattered in the dust and dog hair. "You wasted my money, so you are not going to waste the food. Pick it up, Riley." I stared at her. "You want me to clean it up?" "No." Beatrice smiled, and it was the most evil expression I had ever seen. "I want you to eat it." The crowd gasped. A few women covered their mouths. James, who was standing near the bar, turned pale but did not move. "You clearly do not understand the value of $1 because you have never had any." Beatrice continued playing to her audience. "So teach yourself a lesson. Eat the food off the floor. Since you act like an animal, you might as well eat like one." The silence stretched on for 5 agonizing seconds. I looked at the food in the dirt. Then I looked at James. He looked away. That was the moment. The final thread of my patience, the last shred of my desire to be accepted by these people, snapped. It was not a loud break. It was a quiet, cold realization that I was done. I slowly stood up. I wiped the dust from my knees. I did not pick up the caviar. Instead, I walked calmly over to the main buffet table, where a 5-tier cake and a chocolate fountain were displayed. "Riley, what are you doing?" Beatrice barked. "I gave you an order." I gripped the edge of the table with both hands. I locked eyes with Beatrice. "I am done taking orders from a bankrupt old woman," I said. With a primal scream that had been building in my chest for 3 years, I heaved the table upward. The crash was deafening. The cake, the crystal glasses, the chocolate fountain, everything went flying, crashing onto the patio in a spectacular explosion of glass and sugar. The guests screamed and jumped back as chocolate splattered onto their designer dresses. Beatrice stood frozen, her mouth open in shock. I stepped over the wreckage, my maid's apron covered in chocolate splatter, looking like war paint. I walked right up to her face. "You think because I am quiet I am weak?" I said, my voice low and terrifyingly steady. "You think I am a sheep you can lead to the slaughter. But you made a fatal mistake, Beatrice. You forgot that you were poking a sleeping wolf." I ripped the apron off my body and threw it at her feet. "I am leaving, and when I come back, I am not coming to serve you. I am coming to evict you." I turned my back on the stunned silence and walked out the gate. I did not look back. I had a merger to finalize. Back at the house, the chaos of the ruined party had settled into a sullen, angry silence. Beatrice had retreated to her master suite with a bottle of painkillers, and Camilla was in the garden screaming at the cleaning crew. James was alone in the living room, pacing back and forth. His adrenaline was fading, replaced by a gnawing need for a drink. He needed to numb the memory of his wife standing up to him, the look in her eyes that said she was finished. He checked his wallet. Empty. His credit cards were maxed out, and Beatrice had frozen his allowance until the merger was finalized. He needed cash, a $10 bill, anything to buy a six-pack of cheap beer from the corner store. He remembered that Riley sometimes kept an emergency stash in the basement, a few loose bills tucked inside her art books or hidden in her nightstand. He muttered a curse and headed downstairs to the in-law suite. The room was freezing. He didn't care. He started ransacking the place. He pulled out drawers, dumping her sketchbooks onto the floor. He felt under the mattress. Nothing. He opened the closet, shoving aside her few meager clothes. "Where is it?" he hissed, kicking a cardboard box of paints across the room. "Where does she hide it?" He yanked the bottom drawer of the old oak dresser so hard it came off the tracks. As it crashed to the floor, something taped to the underside of the wood caught his eye. It was a thick, heavy envelope. James bent down and peeled it off. The paper felt expensive, thick and textured like linen. He turned it over. The return address was embossed in gold foil: UBSAG, Bahnhofstrasse 45, Zurich, Switzerland, Private Wealth Management. James frowned. Why would Riley have mail from a Swiss bank? He assumed it was some kind of junk mail, or maybe documents she was holding for one of her old freelance clients. He almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of him. He tore open the seal. He pulled out a document. It was a quarterly portfolio statement. He glanced at the header. Account holder, Riley J. Evans. It was her name. Not a client. Her. James scanned down the page, his eyes glazing over terms he barely understood. Diversified equities, sovereign bonds, crypto assets. Then his eyes landed on the summary box at the bottom of the page. Total net liquidity. He froze. He blinked, thinking there was a smudge on the paper. He brought it closer to his face. He counted the digits. He counted them again. $52,486,000. The air left his lungs. He felt dizzy. He sat down heavily on the bare mattress, the paper trembling in his hand. $52 million. He looked around the room. He looked at the water stains on the ceiling. He looked at the cheap second-hand lamp. He looked at the space heater humming in the corner. His wife, the woman they treated like a beggar, the woman his mother had forced to eat off the floor, was worth more than his entire family combined. She could have bought the mansion. She could have bought the company. She could have bought him. "This cannot be real," he whispered, his voice shaking. But as he flipped through the pages, he saw the transaction history. Wire transfers from Phoenix Holdings, dividends, interest. It was undeniable. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He thought about the way he had slapped her. He thought about the eviction notice. Fear spiked in his chest, followed immediately by a surge of overwhelming greed. 50 million. Wait, they were still married. There was no prenup. A twisted smile slowly spread across his face. Half. By law, half of this belonged to him. He scrambled to his feet, clutching the statement to his chest like a winning lottery ticket. He had to tell Beatrice. They didn't need the merger with the Kensington family anymore. They had a much bigger fish to fry, and she was already caught in their net. He ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time, shouting for his mother. James burst into the master bedroom like a man possessed. Beatrice was lying on her chaise lounge with a cold compress over her eyes, nursing a migraine from the disastrous baby shower. Camilla was pacing the floor, complaining about the cost of the ruined cake, while Dante sat in the corner frantically texting his creditors. "Mom, you have to look at this," James gasped, slamming the heavy door behind him. He was out of breath, his face pale and sweaty. Beatrice peeled the compress off her forehead, her eyes narrowing in irritation. "James, stop shouting. My head is splitting. Unless you are here to tell me you have finalized the divorce papers, I do not want to hear it." James did not speak. He simply marched over to her and thrust the crumpled Swiss bank statement into her hands. "Just read it," he commanded, his voice trembling. Beatrice put on her reading glasses with a sigh of annoyance. She scanned the paper dismissively, at first expecting another bill or a lawsuit. But then her body went rigid. She sat up slowly, the compress sliding onto the floor unnoticed. She traced the numbers with a shaking finger. 52 million, she whispered, the air leaving her lungs. James, what is this? Is this some kind of sick joke? Did you print this off the internet? It is real, Mom, James said, pacing the room with manic energy. I found it hidden under her dresser drawer. It is a verified statement from UBS Switzerland, dated 3 days ago. Camilla snatched the paper from her mother's hands. Let me see that. Her eyes widened until they almost popped out of her head. No way. There is no way that little mouse has $50 million. She wears shoes from Target. She cleans our toilets. Beatrice's shock quickly morphed into suspicion. She stood up, her face twisting into a sneer. She is a criminal, Beatrice declared, throwing her hands up. That is the only explanation. Or she is leading a double life. Maybe that is where she goes when she says she is at the library. She is probably a high-end escort. Or she is laundering money for a cartel. Dante, who had been silent, walked over and took the paper from Camilla. He was the only one in the room who actually understood finance, or at least pretended to. He scanned the transaction history, his eyes darting back and forth. No, Dante said quietly. Beatrice, look at these tickers. Nvidia, Tesla, Bitcoin. These were purchased 7 years ago. He looked up at the family, his expression a mix of awe and terror. She is not a hooker mom. She is an early investor. She bought tech stocks before the boom. She bought crypto when it was pennies. This portfolio is legitimate. It is bulletproof. Riley is not just rich. She is a whale. She is a silent shark. The room fell into a heavy, stunned silence. They looked at each other, processing the reality that the woman they had abused for years could buy and sell their entire existence 10 times over. Then the shift happened. Beatrice walked over to the window and looked out at the garden where Riley had walked away just an hour ago. When she turned back, the disgust in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory hunger. A slow, greedy smile spread across her face. James, Beatrice purred, her voice dripping with sudden sweetness. Did you file the divorce papers yet? No, James stammered. Not yet. Good, Beatrice said, clapping her hands together. Burn them. But Mom, Camilla protested. You said she was trash. You said James had to marry Vanessa. Plans change, Beatrice snapped. Vanessa Kensington brings a $50 million dowry, but she comes with a prenup and a powerful father who watches every penny. Riley is already here. She is already family. And most importantly, she is already married to my son without a prenuptial agreement. Beatrice walked over to James and smoothed the collar of his shirt, looking at him like he was a prize racehorse. Do you understand what this means, James? In the state of Illinois, marital assets are subject to division. If we play this right, that $50 million is not just hers. It is ours. She looked around the room, rallying her troops. We do not evict her. We do not insult her. Starting right now, Riley is the most important person in this family. We need to bring her back into the fold. We need to make her feel loved, safe, and secure. And then once she trusts us again, we will make sure James gets his name on those accounts. She is not a problem anymore. She is a payday. I woke up the next morning expecting to find my bags thrown on the front lawn. Instead, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon wafting down to the basement. It was disorienting. Usually the only thing I smelled in the morning was the damp musk of the foundation walls. I walked upstairs fully dressed and ready for a confrontation. But when I entered the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. The table was set for 4. Not with paper plates, but with the good china. There were platters of fruit pastries and eggs Benedict. Beatrice was standing at the stove wearing an apron that did not have a single speck of dirt on it. She turned around when she heard me and her face split into a wide, terrifyingly bright smile. Good morning, sleepyhead, she chirped. Sit down, darling. I made your favorite. Blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup. I stood there blinking. This was the woman who had forced me to eat off the floor less than 24 hours ago. This was the woman who had called me a parasite. "What is going on?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Did someone die?" Beatrice laughed a musical sound that was completely out of character. "Oh, Riley, you have such a dark sense of humor." "No, silly. James and I were just talking last night, and we realized how stressed we have all been lately. The merger, the gala, everything. We took it out on you, and that was wrong." She walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, but she pretended not to notice. "I want to make it up to you," she said, pouring me a cup of coffee. "I know I can be difficult, but family is family, right? We fight, we forgive. In fact, I cleared my schedule for the entire day. I booked us a mother-daughter package at the Four Seasons Spa. Just you and me. Massages, facials, the works. We need to bond, Riley. I want to get to know the real you." I looked at James, who was sitting at the table reading the newspaper. He lowered the paper and gave me a sheepish, hopeful smile. "You should go, honey," James said. "Mom really feels bad about yesterday. It would mean a lot to her." I looked back at Beatrice. Her eyes were pleading, but behind the warmth I saw the glint of calculation. She was not looking at me with love. She was looking at me like I was a walking ATM. They had found out. Somehow they knew I had money. The old Riley would have melted at this kindness, desperate for a crumb of affection. But the new Riley saw it for what it was, a trap. They were trying to lure me back in so they could bleed me dry. I decided to play along. If they wanted to perform, I would give them a show. "That sounds lovely, Beatrice," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I could really use a massage. My back is killing me from sleeping on that old mattress downstairs." Beatrice's eye twitched, but she kept smiling. "Oh, we will fix that too, darling. We have so much to talk about." I took a bite of the pancake. It tasted like victory. I knew exactly where this was going, and I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she realized her mother-daughter day was actually a funeral procession for her bank account. The Four Seasons Spa was a sanctuary of silence and lavender, a stark contrast to the damp, moldy basement I had called home for the last 3 years. I lay on a heated massage table wrapped in a plush white robe that cost more than my first car. Next to me, Beatrice was getting a mud mask applied to her face, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like a victory march. For the first hour, she played the part of the doting mother-in-law perfectly. She asked about my childhood, complimented my skin, and even apologized again for the incident with the rug. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. But I knew the intermission was coming. I knew exactly when the script would flip to the real topic. As the estheticians left the room to let us relax, Beatrice turned her head toward me. Her eyes were covered with cucumber slices, but I could feel her gaze burning into the side of my head. "You know, Riley," she began, her voice casual but laced with tension. "James mentioned something interesting this morning. He said he stumbled upon some paperwork of yours." I kept my eyes closed, forcing my breathing to remain steady. "I did not mean to hide it, Beatrice. I just did not know how to bring it up." Beatrice chuckled, a dry, scratching sound. "Hiding $50 million is a bit more than a small omission, darling. That is a fortune. But you know, having that much cash sitting in a bank account is actually quite foolish. Inflation is eating it alive. You are losing money every second it sits there." I turned my head slightly. "What do you mean?" Beatrice sat up, peeling the cucumbers off her eyes. She leaned in close, her face green with the mud mask, looking like a swamp monster. "James is a financial wizard, Riley. He is about to become CEO for a reason. If you transfer that money into the family trust, he can invest it for you. He can double it in a year. You do not know how to handle that kind of wealth. You are liable to get scammed by some con artist. Let family protect you." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. James had lost $10,000 last month betting on sports. "I suppose you are right," I said, making my voice sound small and unsure. "I do not know anything about stocks. I just got lucky." Beatrice paused. Her eyes narrowed. Lucky. What do you mean lucky? Did you inherit it? I thought your parents were, well, working class. I took a deep breath and delivered the lie I had prepared perfectly. It was the only explanation a narcissist like her would accept. I won the lottery, I whispered. 5 years ago. I bought a ticket at a gas station in New Jersey. I was afraid if I told anyone they would only want me for my money, so I hid it. Beatrice exhaled a long, shuddering breath. The tension left her shoulders. She smiled, and for the first time it was genuine. It was a smile of pure relief. Of course, she said, patting my hand condescendingly. The lottery. That explains everything. She believed it instantly. In her world, it was impossible for someone like me to earn $50 million through intelligence or hard work. The only way a peasant gets rich is by accident. Well, do not worry, she said, lying back down. You have us now. We will make sure you do not waste it. We will take very good care of it. I watched her close her eyes, dreaming of spending my money. She thought I was a lucky fool. She had no idea she was lying next to the shark that was about to eat her alive. While Beatrice was distracting me with cucumber water and lies about family unity at the spa, Dante and James were back at the house, sitting in the mahogany-paneled study, drafting the blueprint for my destruction. Dante paced around the room like a caged tiger, a glass of scotch in his hand, while James sat slumped in his father's old leather chair, looking both terrified and greedy. You are thinking too small, James, Dante said, slamming his glass down on the desk. You cannot just ask her for access to the accounts. If she really won the lottery, she is going to be guarded. She is going to be suspicious. We need to bypass her brain and go straight for her heart. Or rather, her pathetic need to be loved by you. James looked up confused. What are you talking about, Dante? We are going to stage a vow renewal, Dante announced, spreading his arms wide as if visualizing the headline. A surprise ceremony. Tomorrow night, right here in the garden. You are going to get down on one knee, cry a little bit, and tell her you made a mistake. Tell her you want a fresh start. Tell her you want to marry her all over again. James frowned. A wedding? How does that get us the money? Dante pulled a thick legal document out of his briefcase. It was dense with fine print. This, Dante said, tapping the paper with a sinister grin, is a marital asset consolidation agreement. It basically states that all assets past and present, held in individual accounts, are hereby transferred to the joint marital estate under the control of the primary earner. That is you, James. James leaned forward, reading the title of the document. But she will never sign this. She is not stupid. She will not know she is signing it. Dante explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We will hide it inside the commemorative marriage certificate. You know that pretty piece of paper everyone signs at the altar for photos? We will stack the papers. The top one is the fake certificate. The bottom one is this contract. When you hand her the pen to sign the certificate, you just lift the corner and boom! Her signature goes right onto the transfer order. By the time she realizes what happened, the money will be in our account and there is nothing she can do about it. James hesitated. He looked at the document. He knew it was fraud. He knew it was a betrayal of the highest order. He thought about the woman who had supported him for 5 years. Then he thought about the $52 million. He thought about the CEO title. He thought about the power. Is it legally binding? James asked, his voice barely audible. It is binding enough to freeze her assets while we fight it out in court, Dante lied. And with her money frozen, she will not be able to hire a lawyer to fight us. We win by default. So, little brother, do you want to be a billionaire, or do you want to be a loser living in your mother's guest room? James stared at the pen lying on the desk. He picked it up, feeling the weight of it. The hesitation vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Set it up, James said. Make it look romantic. I want candles. I want flowers. Let us take everything she has. I walked through the front door, expecting another battle, perhaps another eviction notice, or a demand to scrub the floors. Instead, I walked into a scene straight out of a romantic movie. The living room, which was usually a cold museum of antique furniture I was strictly forbidden from touching, had been transformed. Hundreds of candles flickered on every surface, casting a soft golden glow that hid the dust and the malice of this house. In the center of the room, standing on a bed of red rose petals, was James. He was wearing his best suit, the navy blue one I had bought him for our first anniversary back when I still believed in us. He held a massive bouquet of long-stemmed roses, the kind that cost $5 a stem. When he saw me, he did not glare or sigh. He softened his eyes, a look he had not given me in years, and slowly dropped to one knee. "Riley," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have been doing a lot of thinking today." I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching my purse. The acting was impeccable. If I did not know better, I would have believed him. "I have been a terrible husband," James continued, lowering his head in shame. "The pressure of the company, the expectations from my mother, it all got to me. I took it out on the one person who has always been there for me. I treated you like an enemy when you are the only ally I have ever had." He looked up, tears shimmering in his eyes. They were fake tears squeezed out by the desperate need to secure $50 million, but they looked real enough under the candlelight. "I want to make it right, Riley. I want to erase the last few years. I want us to start over. Clean slate. No more secrets. No more fighting. Just us." He extended the flowers toward me. "I want to renew our vows," James said. "Tomorrow, right here in the garden, where we should have been happy. I want to marry you all over again, properly this time. Please, Riley, give me a chance to be the man you deserve." I looked at the flowers. I looked at the man kneeling before me. I saw the slight tremble in his hand, not from romance, but from the adrenaline of the con. He thought he was charming me. He thought he was winning. I dropped my purse and covered my mouth with my hands, letting out a small gasp. I forced my eyes to water, summoning the memory of every insult, every slap, every cold night in the basement to produce genuine tears. "Oh, James," I choked out, walking toward him. I took the flowers and let him pull me into a hug. He squeezed me tight, burying his face in my neck. I could feel his heart racing against my chest. It was the fast, erratic rhythm of a gambler who just went all in on a bluff. "Yes," I whispered into his ear. "Yes, I would love to marry you again." "Thank you." He exhaled, the relief in his voice palpable. "You will not regret this, Riley. I promise." I pulled back and smiled at him, wiping a tear from my cheek. "I know, James, I know." I kissed him, tasting the lie on his lips. He smiled back, thinking he had secured his fortune. He had no idea that while he was planning a wedding, I was planning a funeral. His funeral. The garden ceremony was a masterclass in deception. Beatrice had outdone herself, importing thousands of white orchids to mask the stench of betrayal that hung over the entire evening. James stood under a floral archway, looking dashing in his tuxedo, reciting vows that he had likely downloaded from the internet 10 minutes ago. He spoke of eternal love, partnership, and trust. I stood opposite him, holding his sweating hands, nodding at all the right moments, while my mind was busy calculating the interest rate on the loans I had just bought. When the officiant, a nervous man who I recognized as one of Dante's old poker buddies, finally pronounced us husband and wife for the second time, the family did not cheer. They exhaled. They were not waiting for the kiss. They were waiting for the signature. Right on cue, Dante stepped forward. He was holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio that looked far too heavy to be a simple guest book. He placed it on a small marble table next to the altar with a thud. "Congratulations, you two," Dante said, flashing a smile that showed too many teeth. "Now, before we pop the champagne, we have a little tradition to uphold. Mom thought it would be beautiful to sign a commemorative marriage certificate, something to frame above the fireplace to mark this fresh start." He opened the portfolio. Inside there was a decorative sheet of paper with calligraphy borders, but underneath it, I could see the edges of multiple other pages. Thick, legal-grade paper. They had stacked the asset consolidation agreement right under the fake certificate, staggering the signature lines, so that if I signed the top page, the pressure would transfer through carbon paper, or they would simply slip the bottom pages out later. It was a crude, desperate trick. "Just sign here," Dante said, handing me a heavy gold fountain pen. "And here. And initial here." He began flipping the pages rapidly, his hand hovering over the text blocks to obscure the fine print. "Why are there so many pages for a certificate?" I asked innocently, pausing with the pen in midair. "Oh, you know how it is." Dante laughed nervously, sweat beading on his forehead. "It is just standard legal language to make the vow renewal official in the church records. Just boring boilerplate stuff. Here, sign this one." Beatrice moved closer, her perfume suffocating me. "Hurry up, darling," she urged, her voice tight. "The light is fading and we want to take photos. Just sign it so we can celebrate." I looked at James. He was biting his lip, staring at the pen in my hand with an intensity that bordered on madness. He was watching his $50 million payday. I lowered the pen to the paper. I signed the first page, keeping my signature messy. I heard Dante let out a small breath of relief. I signed the second page. Beatrice took a step closer, practically vibrating with greed. Then Dante flipped to the final page. This was it. The text was dense and tiny. I could see the words irrevocable transfer and joint custody of all sole proprietor assets. I pressed the nib of the pen onto the signature line. The ink began to bleed into the paper, forming a small black dot. Then I stopped. I did not move. I did not write. I just held the pen there, staring at the claws that would strip me of everything I had built. The silence in the garden was absolute. The string quartet had stopped playing. A bird chirped in the distance, sounding loud as a gunshot. Riley James whispered, his voice cracking with panic. "Is something wrong?" I slowly lifted my eyes from the paper and looked at my husband. I saw the terror in his eyes. He thought I had read it. He thought the game was up. For a solid 10 seconds, nobody breathed. The entire future of the family hung on the tip of that pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. The tip of the gold pen trembled. I looked up at James, smiling that sweet, innocent smile of a woman deeply in love. "I am just so nervous," I whispered, my voice fluttering. "My hands are shaking." Then with a sudden jerky movement, I reached for the heavy crystal inkwell sitting on the table to refill the pen. But I did not dip the nib. Instead, my wrist accidentally slammed into the side of the glass bottle. It happened in slow motion. The heavy inkwell tipped over. Thick black permanent India ink flooded across the marble table. It soaked into the white linen tablecloth, and more importantly, it drenched the stack of papers. The black liquid spread like a virus, obliterating the text, the signature lines, and the hidden clauses Dante had so carefully drafted. "Oh my God," I gasped, dropping the pen and jumping back to avoid the splash. "I am so sorry. I am so clumsy. Look what I did." Dante lunged forward, trying to grab the papers, but it was too late. The asset consolidation agreement was a soggy black mess. He held up the dripping pages, ink running down his expensive suit sleeves and dripping onto his Italian leather shoes. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "You stupid!" He started to shout, his eyes bulging with rage, but he caught himself just in time. He looked at Beatrice, panic flashing in his eyes. Their legal trap was destroyed. Beatrice looked like she was about to have a stroke. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles white. She forced a smile that looked more like a grimace of physical pain. "It is okay, darling," Beatrice said through gritted teeth, her voice straining to remain calm. "Accidents happen. Dante, go print another copy immediately. We can sign it inside the house." "No," I said, cutting her off firmly. I grabbed a napkin and started dabbing uselessly at the table, smearing the ink further. "I do not want to sign a reprint. It feels like bad luck. This was supposed to be perfect and I ruined it." I looked at them, widening my eyes to look earnest and vulnerable. Besides, I continued standing up and facing them. "This paper is just a formality. It is too small for what I really want to do." James stepped forward, his greed peaked instantly. "What do you mean, Riley?" I took his hands in mine, ignoring the ink staining my fingers. "I was going to save this as a surprise," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "But since I ruined the ceremony, I will tell you now. I have been thinking about the company, about the debt, about everything, and I decided that just sharing my accounts privately is not enough." I paused for effect, letting them lean in. I want to make a public declaration. Tomorrow night at the company gala, I want to stand on stage with you, James, and announce a massive capital injection that will save the family legacy forever. I want the whole world to know that we are united. I want to hand you the check in front of the cameras. Beatrice's eyes lit up. A public announcement at the gala, with the press watching. It was better than a secret contract. It would be binding in the court of public opinion, and it would boost the company stock instantly. You would do that? James asked, breathless. Of course I lied. So let us forget about these silly papers tonight. Let us celebrate, and tomorrow we make history. Beatrice beamed. She walked over and hugged me carefully, avoiding the ink stains. That is a wonderful idea, Riley. A truly noble gesture. They raised their glasses again, toasting to the fortune they thought they had secured. They were so blinded by the promise of public glory that they did not realize I had just bought myself 24 hours to sharpen the guillotine. The gala was not going to be their victory lap. It was going to be their execution. The morning of the gala was supposed to be a celebration of the family's resilience. Instead, inside the executive boardroom of the Beatrice Group, the atmosphere was funereal. While I was sitting in a salon chair across town calmly directing my team to finalize the acquisition, James and his mother were staring at a legal document that spelled their doom. The company attorney, a man who had grown gray hair trying to hide their financial incompetence, threw a thick packet of papers onto the mahogany table. It is over, Beatrice, the lawyer said, loosening his tie with a trembling hand. We just received a formal notice of acceleration from the primary creditor. The entity known as Phoenix Holdings has called in the debt, all of it. James jumped out of his chair. What do you mean, all of it? We have a payment plan. Not anymore, the lawyer replied grimly. They found a breach in the covenant, specifically the undisclosed loans Dante took out against the company assets. They are demanding full repayment of the $50 million principal plus accumulated interest by midnight tonight. And if we do not pay, James asked, his voice barely a whisper. If the funds are not wired by 12 a.m., they execute the seizure clause. They take the factory. They take the intellectual property. They take the building we are sitting in right now. You will be escorted out by security in the morning. James sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. We are dead. We do not have $50 million liquid. We are going to lose everything before the gala even starts. Silence filled the room. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a countdown. But then a low chuckle broke the tension. James looked up. Beatrice was laughing. She was leaning back in her leather chair, checking her diamond watch, looking completely unbothered. Stop being so dramatic, Harold. Beatrice told the lawyer, waving her hand dismissively. You always panic too easily. Mom, did you not hear him? James shouted. We need $50 million by midnight. And we will get it, Beatrice said calmly. You are forgetting our secret weapon. You are forgetting your wife. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline she believed she still owned. Riley is going to save us, Beatrice declared with absolute conviction. Did you not see her face last night in the garden? She is desperate to please us. She is desperate for my approval. Tonight on that stage, she is going to hand us a check that will make this debt disappear. She thinks she is buying her way back into this family. In reality, she is just paying for the privilege of serving us. But what if she backs out? Dante asked nervously, wiping sweat from his forehead. What if she changes her mind? She won't, Beatrice sneered. She is a weak, sentimental little girl who thinks she won the lottery. She does not have the backbone to betray us. She loves James too much. Beatrice turned back to the table, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous delusion. Ignore the notice, Harold. Tell Phoenix Holdings to wait until morning. By the time the clock strikes 12, Riley's money will be in our accounts and we will own this city again. Now everyone get out. I need to go get dressed. I want to look spectacular when I accept my victory. They left the room high on their own arrogance. They walked straight toward the cliff edge, convinced they could fly. They had no idea that the creditor they were ignoring, the entity demanding their destruction, was currently getting a manicure and planning the exact moment to push them off. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a sea of black ties, sequins, and nervous energy. Every major player in Chicago's business world was there sipping champagne and whispering about the rumors of the Beatrice Group's bankruptcy. Beatrice stood at the entrance to the VIP section, a velvet rope separating her from the common guests. She was holding court, laughing too loudly, trying to convince the creditors in the room that everything was under control. When she saw me approaching, her smile vanished instantly. I was wearing a simple, understated black dress, the kind that blends into the background. To her, I looked like a stain on her perfect canvas. She excused herself from a conversation with a senator and rushed over to intercept me, grabbing my elbow with a grip that felt like a claw. "Riley, what are you doing here so early?" she hissed, pulling me behind a towering floral arrangement of white lilies. "And why are you wearing that rag? I told you this was a black tie event. You look like you are going to a funeral." "In a way, I am," I thought to myself. "I came to support James," I said aloud, keeping my voice neutral. "I thought we were making the announcement together." Beatrice rolled her eyes. "We are, but not yet. Look around, Riley. The press is here. The mayor is here. I cannot have you sitting at the head table looking like a charity case. It ruins the image of success we are trying to project. We need to look powerful, and frankly, you look like the help." She pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the room, near the swinging doors of the kitchen, where the waiters were bringing out dirty dishes. "Go sit at table 42, she commanded. "It is reserved for the junior staff and interns. Stay there. Do not speak to the press. Do not eat anything. Just wait for my signal. When I announce the strategic partnership, you come up to the stage, hand over the check, smile for one photo, and then go back to your seat. Do you understand?" I looked at the dark corner she was banishing me to. Even now, when she believed I was about to give her $50 million, she still could not bring herself to treat me with an ounce of respect. She wanted my money, but she was ashamed of me. "Understood, Beatrice," I said calmly. "I will go to my designated spot." "Good girl," she said, patting my cheek dismissively. "Now go away. You are blocking the view." She turned her back on me, flashing a bright fake smile as she waved to a banker she owed money to. I watched her for a moment, etching this final insult into my memory. I walked away from the VIP section, but I did not go to table 42. I walked straight past the confused junior staff, pushed open the heavy service doors, and stepped out onto the loading dock. The cold night wind hit my face, cleansing away the stench of her perfume. Waiting at the curb, hidden in the shadows of the alley, was a sleek, black armored limousine. My driver, a former Special Forces operative, stepped out and opened the rear door. I slid into the plush leather interior. Hanging on the rack was a garment bag stamped with the logo of Dior. Inside was a custom couture gown, diamond earrings, and the paperwork that would end Beatrice's reign forever. "Are we ready, Madam Chairwoman?" the driver asked. "Yes," I replied, unzipping the bag. "Circle the block. Give me 10 minutes to change. Then take me to the front entrance. It is time to show them who really owns this city." The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed, signaling the start of the main event. A hush fell over the crowd of 500 guests. Beatrice stood at the podium, bathed in a golden spotlight that made her diamond necklace sparkle aggressively. She looked every inch the matriarch, confident and untouchable. She adjusted the microphone, scanning the room with a look of supreme triumph. She believed she had won. She believed that in a few seconds, I would walk out from the shadows, hand her a check, and save her reputation. "Distinguished guests, members of the press and loyal partners," Beatrice began, her voice booming through the speakers. "Over the past few weeks, there have been whispers, unkind rumors suggesting that the Beatrice Group was faltering, that our legacy was crumbling under the weight of modern markets." She paused for dramatic effect, letting a smug smile play on her lips. James was standing in the wings, looking pale and sweating profusely, wringing his hands. "I am here tonight to tell you that those rumors could not be more wrong," Beatrice continued. "While our competitors were busy gossiping, we were busy building. We were silently negotiating a deal that will not only stabilize our operations, but launch us into a new stratosphere of global dominance." A murmur of intrigue rippled through the crowd. The bankers in the front row leaned in skeptical but listening. It is my distinct honor to announce that we have secured a full acquisition of our outstanding liabilities by a new strategic partner, Beatrice announced, her voice rising in a crescendo. An entity known as Phoenix Holdings. This partnership represents a massive injection of liquid capital. It is a marriage of tradition and innovation. She gestured grandly toward the back of the room, specifically toward the heavy double doors where she had told me to wait. And now, I would like to invite the representative of Phoenix Holdings to join me on stage. A woman who has become very dear to this family. A woman who understands the true value of loyalty. Beatrice looked directly at the doors, nodding her head, as if conducting an orchestra. Please welcome the chairwoman of Phoenix Holdings. The orchestra struck up a triumphant swell of music. The massive mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom began to slowly creak open. The lighting technician cut the house lights and swung a blinding white spotlight onto the entrance. Every head in the room turned. Cameras flashed, ready to capture the savior. Beatrice extended her hand, a welcoming grin plastered on her face, ready to embrace the daughter-in-law she had tormented for years. The doors swung fully open. The spotlight hit the red carpet. And there was absolutely no one there. The music played on for a few awkward measures before the conductor realized something was wrong and signaled the band to stop. The melody trailed off into a discordant squeak. The smile froze on Beatrice's face. The photographers lowered their cameras. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd like a wave. For 10 agonizing seconds, the only thing the spotlight illuminated was the dust floating in the empty doorway. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely delicious. From the depths of the shadowed hallway, I took my first step onto the red carpet. The sound of my stilettos striking the floor echoed like gunshots in the silent ballroom. Click, click, click. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting the anticipation build. As I moved into the blinding white column of the spotlight, a collective gasp swept through the room. I was no longer the girl in the off-the-rack black dress hiding in the corner. I was draped in a custom Dior gown made of shimmering silver silk that hugged every curve and flowed behind me like a river of mercury. But it was not the dress that made the crowd stare. It was the necklace resting against my throat. The Aurora diamond. A 20-carat blue stone surrounded by white diamonds. It was the exact piece Beatrice had tried to bid on at Sotheby's last year, only to be outbid by an anonymous buyer. That buyer was me. I saw Beatrice's eyes bulge. She looked at the necklace, then up at my face, her brain struggling to process the impossible image before her. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Riley, she hissed, her voice a frantic whisper that the microphone barely picked up. What are you doing? Get down from here. You are ruining the moment. I told you to wait for the signal. I ignored her. I kept walking, my eyes locked on hers. I ascended the stairs to the stage, not with the hesitant shuffle of a servant, but with the predatory grace of a queen returning to claim her throne. James, who was standing stage left, looked like he had seen a ghost. Riley, he mouthed, staring at the diamonds. Beatrice stepped forward to block me, covering the microphone with her hand. Her face was a mask of panic. You little idiot, she whispered furiously. Go back to table 42 right now. Take off that jewelry. Did you steal it? I will have you arrested. Get off my stage. I stopped inches from her face. I smiled, but it was a smile that promised destruction. Your stage? I asked softly. I do not think so. I reached out and firmly removed her hand from the microphone. She was too stunned to resist. I pulled the stand toward me and looked out at the sea of 500 faces. The bankers, the rivals, the socialites who had laughed at me for years. They were all silent now, captivated by the transformation. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice steady and commanding, ringing clear through the high-end sound system. Beatrice tried to grab my arm. Security, she signaled frantically to the wings. Remove her. I turned to the security guards who were stepping forward. They paused, looking at me, then at the pin I was wearing on my dress, the golden phoenix emblem. They stopped dead in their tracks and bowed their heads. They knew who signed their paychecks. I turned back to the audience. My mother-in-law introduced a strategic partner tonight. I continued, my voice hardening. She told you that Phoenix Holdings has come to save the Beatrice Group. She is right about the acquisition, but she is wrong about the leadership. I paused, letting the tension snap. My name is Riley Evans, and I am not just a silent investor. I am the founder and chairwoman of Phoenix Holdings, and as of midnight tonight, I am the sole owner of this company. Beatrice let out a strangled cry and collapsed against the podium. The room erupted. I stood tall in the spotlight, watching my husband's world shatter into a million pieces. The collective gasp that swept through the ballroom was loud enough to be heard in the lobby. 500 heads turned from the screen to the stage, their eyes wide with shock. James stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, looking like a fish gasping for air on dry land. He blinked rapidly, staring at me as if he were trying to wake up from a nightmare. But I was very real, and I was just getting started. I did not give them time to process the impossible. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small remote control. I pointed it at the massive LED screen behind the podium, the one that was supposed to display their triumphant merger logo. With a single click, the image changed. The screen was instantly filled with high-definition scans of financial documents. They were covered in red ink. The words, default insolvency and past due, were highlighted in bright yellow for everyone to see. Beatrice, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the stunned silence. You stood here and told these people you were expanding. You told them you were a pillar of the business community. But the truth is, the Beatrice Group has been bankrupt for 6 months. That is a lie! Beatrice shrieked, lunging for the remote. She looked deranged, her perfect facade cracking under the pressure. Turn it off. Turn it off right now. I stepped out of her reach, maintaining my composure. Look at the signatures, Beatrice, I said coldly. These are your loan agreements. The ones you defaulted on in February. The ones you tried to hide from the board. Every bank in Chicago turned you down for refinancing. The wolves were at the door, ready to seize your assets and auction off your furniture. I turned to James, whose face had gone deathly pale. That is when Phoenix Holdings stepped in, I explained. I bought your debt, James. I bought every single promissory note. I spent $50 million of my own money to quietly acquire your liabilities. I did it because I foolishly thought that if I saved your legacy, if I protected you from ruin, you might eventually treat me with a shred of decency. I wanted to hand you this company as a gift. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. The reporters were typing furiously on their phones. But I was wrong. I continued, my voice dropping an octave. You did not want a partner. You wanted a victim. You tried to evict me. You tried to steal from me. You tried to erase me. I looked back at Beatrice. Her eyes were wild with fear. She knew what was coming. So tonight is not a partnership, I declared, facing the audience. I am calling in the debt. Since you cannot pay the $50 million you owe me by midnight, I am exercising the foreclosure clause immediately. I turned to face the terrified trio, Beatrice, James, and Camilla, who had just rushed onto the stage looking horrified. As the sole owner of the debt and the effective majority shareholder, I am restructuring the leadership effective this second. Beatrice, you are fired from your position as chairwoman. James, your appointment as CEO is rescinded. Camilla, you are removed from the board of directors. I signaled to the security team who were waiting in the wings. Security, please escort the former management off the premises. They are trespassing. The air in the ballroom was electric, charged with the shock of my announcement, but Dante reacted with the desperate violence of a cornered animal. While Beatrice and James stood frozen in their humiliation, Dante's eyes turned black with a murderous rage. He realized that his life of luxury, his lies, and his freedom were evaporating in front of 500 witnesses. He let out a feral roar that echoed off the high ceilings. You lying witch! Dante screamed, his face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. I will kill you! He lunged across the stage, ignoring the cameras and the gasps from the crowd. He sprinted toward me, his hands reaching for my throat, intent on silencing me forever. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The sound cut through the chaos sharper than a knife. Instantly, 4 uniformed police officers emerged from the wings of the stage. They had been waiting for my signal. Before Dante could get within 3 feet of me, they tackled him. The sound of his expensive suit hitting the hard floor was amplified by the microphone, followed by the metallic click of handcuffs being ratcheted tight. "Get off me!" Dante bellowed, struggling against the weight of the officers. "Do you know who I am? This is assault. I am a partner in this firm." I walked over to where he was pinned down, looking at him with cool detachment. I signaled the technician in the booth. The screen behind me shifted again. Gone were the bankruptcy notices, replaced by a complex web of wire transfers and offshore account numbers. "You are not a partner, Dante," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the rapt audience. "You are a felon." I turned to the crowd, pointing at the damning evidence on the screen. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing is the paper trail of a massive embezzlement scheme. For the past 2 years, Dante has been siphoning company funds into shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. He used the company pension fund to cover his gambling debts and his failed crypto investments. He forged James S. signature on loan documents and falsified the quarterly reports to hide the theft." I looked down at Dante, who had stopped struggling. His face was pressed against the floor, his eyes wide with terror, as he realized I knew everything. "I submitted this evidence to the district attorney this morning," I continued. "You are not just going broke, Dante. You are going to federal prison for wire fraud and grand larceny." The flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm, capturing the image of the once arrogant man being hauled to his feet by the police. That was when Camilla broke. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. Her husband was going to jail and her family was destitute. She fell to her knees, crawling toward me, grabbing the hem of my silver gown with her shaking hands. "Riley, please," she wailed, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "Stop them. He is the father of my child. You cannot do this. We have nothing." I pulled my dress from her grip, stepping back to avoid her touch. I looked down at her with zero sympathy. "You should have thought about that before you mocked me for being poor Camilla. You laughed when I had to scrub your floors. Now you will learn what it really feels like to have nothing." I watched as the officers dragged a screaming Dante and a sobbing Camilla off the stage. The rot had been cut out. Now only the heart of the betrayal remained. I turned slowly to face my husband. The silence that followed Dante's arrest was heavy, broken only by the sound of James's heavy breathing. He looked at the empty space where his brother-in-law had been standing then, at his mother who was trembling like a leaf in a storm. Finally, he looked at me. The arrogance that had defined him for our entire marriage was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic terror. He realized he was the last rat on the sinking ship. He did not run. He scrambled. He practically crawled across the stage until he was at my feet, grabbing the hem of my silver gown with shaking hands. "Riley, baby, please." James stammered, tears streaming down his face. "You cannot do this. I know you are angry. I know we made mistakes. But we are married. We just renewed our vows yesterday. You love me, I know you do." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, trying to summon the charm that had trapped me 5 years ago. "You would not hurt your husband, right?" He continued, his voice cracking. "Think about us. Think about our future. Please, just tell the lawyers to stop. Thought for Mom. She is an old woman. She cannot handle this. We can run the company together just like you wanted." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a cold, clinical detachment. I was looking at a stranger. "Stand up, James," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a shard of ice. "You are embarrassing yourself." He did not move. He clung tighter. "Riley, I love you," he sobbed. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Love," I repeated, shaking my head. "You have a very strange way of showing it, James. Was it love when you planned to divorce me last week? Was it love when you agreed to marry Vanessa Kensington just to secure a merger?" James froze. His face went white. He thought I didn't know about the arrangement. I leaned down, bringing my face close to his so he could see the absolute resolve in my eyes. "I heard everything, James. I know you were going to trade me in like a used car the moment you got the CEO title. You were ready to throw me on the street to marry a banker's daughter. So do not talk to me about love. You do not love me. You love my bank account. I straightened up and pulled my dress from his grip. But I have good news for you, James. I am going to give you exactly what you wanted. I am granting you a divorce. You are a free man. You can go marry Vanessa right now. I paused, smiling cruelly. Although I doubt she will want you now. Vanessa wanted a CEO with a trust fund. You are currently unemployed, homeless, and millions of dollars in debt. You have nothing to offer her but your last name, and frankly, that is not worth much anymore. James stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, realizing the full extent of his ruin. He had lost the wife who loved him, the mistress who wanted his money, and the company that gave him his identity. I turned to the head of security, a burly man who had been waiting for this moment. "Get them out of my sight," I ordered, pointing at James and Beatrice. "Remove them from my building. If they try to re-enter, call the police and have them charged with trespassing." James screamed as 2 guards hauled him to his feet. Beatrice was dragged away in silence, too shocked to speak. I watched them disappear through the back exit, kicked out of the gala they had planned, expelled from the company they had destroyed. I stood alone on the stage, straightened my diamond necklace, and turned back to the audience. The reign of the Beatrice family was over. My reign had just begun. The morning sun did not bring warmth to the sprawling estate that had housed the Beatrice dynasty for 3 generations. Instead, it illuminated the cold, hard reality of foreclosure. The driveway, usually lined with luxury sedans, was now blocked by 3 large moving trucks and a sheriff's patrol car. The front door stood wide open, not in welcome, but in surrender. Inside the house was a chaotic symphony of defeat. Uniformed movers were efficiently stripping the rooms, wrapping antiques in bubble wrap and cataloging paintings on clipboards. Every item was tagged with a bright orange sticker that read, "Asset seized." Beatrice was standing in the center of the foyer, still wearing her gala gown from the night before, her makeup smeared and her hair wild. She was screaming at a burly officer who was in the process of removing a 16th century tapestry from the wall. "Do not touch that!" Beatrice shrieked, grabbing the officer's arm. "That has been in my family for 80 years. You have no right. This is theft. I will sue you. I will sue this entire department." The officer gently but firmly peeled her fingers off his uniform. "Ma'am, please step back. We have a court order. If you interfere again, I will have to place you in handcuffs for obstruction." Beatrice spun around, looking for someone to blame, someone to scream at. That was when she saw me. I was standing in the doorway wearing a crisp white suit, holding a cup of coffee. I watched the movers with the detached interest of a project manager overseeing a renovation. "You," Beatrice hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this. You vindictive little snake. You cannot just kick me out of my own home. My grandfather built this house." I took a sip of coffee and walked into the room, my heels clicking on the marble floor, the same floor she had once forced me to scrub on my hands and knees. "Correction. Beatrice," I said calmly. "Your grandfather built it. You mortgaged it. And I bought the note. Technically, this has been my house since midnight." I signaled to the lead mover, who stopped working to listen. "You are trespassing on private property," I continued, checking my watch. "But I am feeling generous today. I will give you exactly 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Beatrice gasped, her eyes bulging. "To pack a lifetime of memories. To pack your personal effects," I corrected her sharply. "Clothes, toiletries, medicine. That is it." I walked over to the side table where she had piled a stack of silver picture frames and a heavy jewelry box. I reached out and picked up the jewelry box. Beatrice lunged for it, but I pulled it out of reach. "Everything else stays," I said, my voice hardening. "The furniture, the art, the silver, the jewelry, even this box. It all belongs to the estate now to offset the $50 million you owe me. You leave with nothing but the clothes on your back and whatever fits in a suitcase." "But my diamonds," Beatrice wailed, tears finally spilling over. "My mother gave me those earrings. And your son tried to steal my fortune," I countered coldly. "Consider it a trade." I snapped my fingers and one of the movers handed me a roll of heavy-duty black trash bags. I walked over to Beatrice and shoved the plastic roll into her chest. "We are out of suitcases," I said, staring into her weeping eyes. "But these should work fine. It is fitting, really. You used to treat me like trash. Now you can carry your life in a trash bag." Beatrice looked at the black plastic in her hands. She looked at the empty walls where her identity used to hang. She looked at me, hoping for a crack in my armor, a hint of the submissive girl she used to torment. She found none. "Start packing, Beatrice," I said, turning my back on her. "The clock is ticking. And do not scratch the floors on your way out. I just had them appraised." 15 minutes later, the heavy oak doors slammed shut. I watched from the window as Beatrice, the once feared matriarch of Chicago society, walked down the long driveway alone. She was dragging 2 bulging black garbage bags behind her, her gala dress, trailing in the dirt, looking exactly like the homeless woman she had always feared becoming. Justice had been served, and it was cold. The family court of Cook County was a sterile, fluorescent-lit purgatory where love went to be legally dismembered. The air smelled of floor wax and desperation. James sat at the plaintiff's table, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a single week. His suit, once tailored and crisp, was wrinkled and hung loosely on his frame. He had no high-powered legal team today, just a court-appointed attorney who looked bored and was checking his watch every 30 seconds. I sat on the other side, flanked by Arthur Henderson and 2 junior associates. I wore a crimson power suit that cost more than James's car. I did not look at him. I looked at the judge. A stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose who clearly had no patience for nonsense. James's lawyer cleared his throat and stood up. "Your Honor," he began, shuffling his papers. "My client, Mr. James Evans, is seeking an equitable distribution of marital assets." During the course of their 5-year marriage, the defendant, Mrs. Riley Evans, acquired significant wealth, including a lottery win and the controlling stake in a major corporation. Under Illinois state law, these are considered community property. My client is entitled to 50%. That is $26 million, plus half the company's stock. James nodded vigorously, leaning forward. "It is only fair, Your Honor," he piped up, his voice whining. "I supported her for 5 years. She lived in my mother's house rent-free. I paid for her food. I paid for her clothes. I built the foundation for her success." I stifled a laugh. He meant he let me live in a moldy basement and eat leftovers. The judge looked over her glasses at me. "Mrs. Evans, do you have a response to this claim?" Mr. Henderson stood up slowly. He did not look worried. He looked like a cat playing with a half-dead mouse. "We do, Your Honor." Henderson said, his voice smooth as silk. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single yellowing document. It was preserved in a plastic sheet protector. "The plaintiff's claim relies on the assumption that this marriage is governed by standard state statutes," Henderson continued. "However, that is incorrect. Before the marriage took place 5 years ago, Mr. Evans's mother, Beatrice Evans, insisted on a very strict, very specific contract." He walked up to the bench and handed the document to the judge. "Exhibit A, Your Honor. A prenuptial agreement. Drafted by the Beatrice Group's top corporate attorneys." James froze. His eyes went wide. He had forgotten. Henderson turned to face James, smiling cruelly. "Allow me to read Article 4, Section C," Henderson announced to the court. It states, "To prevent financial opportunism, all assets acquired by either party, before, during, or after the marriage, shall remain the sole and exclusive property of the individual named on the title. There shall be no commingling of funds. There shall be no alimony. There shall be no equitable distribution. What is yours, and what is mine, is mine." I watched the realization hit James like a physical blow. 5 years ago, Beatrice had forced me to sign that paper because she was convinced I was a gold digger. She wanted to make sure that if James ever divorced me, I would walk away with nothing. She had hired the best lawyers in the city to make it ironclad. "James the First," said softly, breaking my silence. Your mother was so afraid I would steal your money that she made it legally impossible for you to touch mine. She wrote her own son out of the will. James looked at his lawyer, panic rising in his chest. Do something, he hissed. Object. Say it was under duress. The public defender shrugged. It is a notarized contract, buddy, and your family wrote it. I cannot argue against your own lawyers. The judge finished reading the document. She took off her glasses and looked at James with a mixture of pity and amusement. Mr. Evans, she said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. This agreement is valid. It is incredibly comprehensive. It seems your family wanted to ensure total financial separation. She picked up her gavel. The court finds in favor of the defendant. The prenuptial agreement stands. Mr. Evans, your request for 50% of the lottery winnings and company stock is denied. You are entitled to $0.00. She slammed the gavel down. Case closed. Divorce granted. James slumped back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The irony was suffocating. The trap Beatrice had built for me had snapped shut on her own son's neck. He walked into that courtroom, hoping for a payday. He walked out a beggar. The fluorescent lights of the Save-A-Lot grocery store buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency that made Camilla dizzy. She stood at register 4, her feet throbbing in cheap rubber sneakers, scanning cans of discount soup for 8 hours straight. The polyester uniform chafed her skin, a constant itchy reminder of how far she had fallen. 6 months ago, she was hosting galas. Now she was scanning coupons for people she used to refuse entry to her parties. Dante was gone, serving a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud. The government had seized everything. The mansion, the cars, the jewelry, even her designer diaper bag. She was living in a studio apartment the size of her old walk-in closet, struggling to buy formula for a baby who cried all night. Next customer, Camilla croaked her throat dry. She kept her head down, grabbing a bottle of expensive Chardonnay from the conveyor belt. She knew that label. It cost $40. That was half her daily wage. Oh my God, is that Camilla? The voice was high, shrill, and painfully familiar. Camilla froze. She slowly lifted her eyes. Standing in front of her were Bethany and Chloe, two of her closest friends from the country club. They were wearing tennis whites, glowing with health and wealth, holding the very wine she was scanning. Camilla, Bethany gasped, covering her mouth in mock horror. We heard about Dante, but we did not know it was this bad. You are actually working here. Chloe laughed, a cruel tinkling sound. Well, someone has to bag the groceries, Bethany. Camilla felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to disappear into the linoleum floor. She tried to scan the wine quickly just to get them away from her. Paper or plastic? Camilla asked, her voice trembling. Plastic, obviously, Chloe sneered. We are not saving the planet today. We are celebrating. Bethany just got back from Paris. Bethany leaned over the counter, inspecting Camilla's name tag, which was crooked. You know, honey, this actually suits you, Bethany said, her eyes gleaming with malice. Remember at your baby shower? You said Riley had a servant's mindset. You said some people are just born to serve. She laughed, tapping her manicured nails on the counter. I guess you were projecting, darling. It turns out you are the one who is good at cleaning up other people's messes. Here is your receipt, Camilla whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Bethany snatched the paper. Thanks. Keep the change. You look like you need it more than we do. They walked away, giggling, their laughter echoing through the store. Camilla stood there paralyzed. The line behind her started to grumble. Hey lady, are you gonna move or what? A customer yelled. I need a break, Camilla choked out. She turned off her register light and ran. She burst through the swinging doors into the stockroom, collapsing onto a crate of expired milk. The smell of cardboard and dust filled her nose. She buried her face in her hands, and finally let the tears come. She cried for her lost life. She cried for her husband. But mostly she cried because she realized that Riley was right. The universe had a twisted sense of humor, and the punchline was brutal. She was the help now, and there was no one coming to save her. The smell of boiled cabbage and industrial bleach hung heavy in the air at the Shady Pines State Care Facility. It was a far cry from the lavender-scented halls of the Four Seasons or the mahogany-paneled rooms of the estate. Here the walls were a depressing shade of beige, the linoleum floors were scuffed, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with an incessant headache-inducing hum. Beatrice sat in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at a parking lot filled with potholes. Her left hand rested limply in her lap, a lingering souvenir from the mild stroke she had suffered the day the eviction notice was finalized. Her face was slightly drawn on one side, but her eyes still burned with the same fierce delusional arrogance. "Nurse." She barked, her speech slightly slurred but commanding. "This soup is cold. Take it back. I specifically asked for the vichyssoise, not this gray sludge." The nurse, a tired woman named Brenda, who had been working a double shift, did not even look up from her clipboard. "It is potato soup, Beatrice. Eat it or do not eat it. The kitchen is closed." Beatrice slammed her good hand on the tray table. "Do you know who I am? I am Beatrice Evans. My family built this city. My daughter-in-law is Riley Evans, the billionaire, the chairwoman of Phoenix Holdings. She is going to have this place shut down for treating me like this." Brenda sighed, walking over to check Beatrice's blood pressure. She had heard this story 100 times. Every patient in the ward claimed to be related to someone famous. The man in room 304 claimed he invented the internet. The woman in 306 said she was the secret wife of Elvis Presley. Beatrice was just another senile old woman lost in her own fantasy. "Sure, honey," Brenda said, pumping the cuff tight around Beatrice's withered arm. "And I am the Duchess of Cambridge. If your daughter-in-law is a billionaire, why are you in a state-funded facility wearing a gown that opens in the back? Why has she never visited? Not once in 3 months." "She is busy," Beatrice snapped, though a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes. "She is running a global empire. She is managing my assets until I recover. She calls me every day." That was a lie. The phone on the nightstand had never rung. Not even James called, mostly because he could not afford the collect charges from the homeless shelter. "Look," Brenda said, peeling off the Velcro cuff. "You need to stop with the stories. It upsets the other residents. Just take your meds and watch your TV." She clicked the remote and the small mounted television flickered to life. By a cruel twist of fate, the evening news was on. The anchor was beaming. "In business news, Riley Evans, CEO of Phoenix Holdings, has just announced a record-breaking quarter," the reporter said. The camera cut to Riley. She looked radiant, powerful, and completely unburdened by the past. She was cutting a ribbon on a new charity hospital wing. Beatrice gasped, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "Look, that is her. That is Riley. I told you. That is my family." Brenda glanced at the screen, then back at the lonely, bitter woman in the wheelchair. She shook her head with pity. "That is a nice lady on the TV, Beatrice. But she is not your family. You do not have any family left." Brenda turned off the lights and walked out, closing the door. "No, wait," Beatrice cried out into the darkness. "She knows me. She owes me everything. Come back, look at the screen." But nobody came. The room was silent save for the low murmur of the television. Beatrice watched Riley smile for the cameras, a smile that was no longer for her. She was the woman who had demanded the world bow to her, and now she was shouting into the void, trapped in a prison of her own making, realizing with terrifying clarity that she had become exactly what she hated most: irrelevant. 1 year later, the view from the 95th floor of the Willis Tower was breathtaking. Clouds drifted by below eye level, a white ocean separating me from the noise and chaos of the streets below. This was not the dark mahogany-paneled dungeon of the old Beatrice Group headquarters. This was the new Phoenix Holdings. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass. The furniture was sleek white oak, and the air smelled of fresh orchids and limitless ambition. I sat behind a desk made of reclaimed driftwood and steel, a piece of art that cost more than the house I grew up in. Across from me sat a young woman named Sarah. She was 22, wearing a thrifted blazer that was slightly too big for her shoulders, and her hands were stained with charcoal and oil paint. She was trembling, clutching a portfolio of sketches to her chest as if it were a shield. She reminded me so much of myself 5 years ago that it made my heart ache. "You do not need to be nervous, Sarah." I said, my voice soft but authoritative. I read your proposal. Your designs are innovative. The sustainable materials you want to use for your clothing line are exactly what the market needs right now. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. But Mrs. Evans, every bank in the city turned me down. They said I have no collateral. They said I am a liability. I smiled. I knew that word well. To the world I had been a liability. To Beatrice I had been a parasite. But I had turned that liability into an empire. Banks look at numbers, Sarah. I look at potential. I look at resilience. I started the Phoenix Initiative specifically for women like you. Women who have the talent but lack the backing. We do not offer loans, we offer grants. You do not pay us back with money, you pay us back by succeeding. I opened the leather folder on my desk and pulled out a check. I uncapped my gold fountain pen. It was the same pen I had held in the garden the day I destroyed James and his family. Back then it was a weapon. Now it was a tool for creation. I wrote the date. I filled in the amount. $250,000. I signed my name at the bottom. Not Mrs. James Evans. Just Riley. I slid the check across the glass surface. Here is your seed money, I said. Go build something beautiful. And when people tell you that you cannot do it, remember this moment. Remember that the chairwoman of Phoenix Holdings bet on you. Sarah stared at the check, tears welling in her eyes. She stood up shaking and took it with both hands. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means. I will not let you down. I know you won't, I replied. Now go. You have work to do. She left the office walking a little taller, her future secure in her pocket. I swiveled my chair around to face the window. The city of Chicago sprawled out beneath me, a grid of steel and light. Somewhere down there, in a cramped grocery store, Camilla was scanning coupons. Somewhere in a state facility, Beatrice was complaining about cold soup. Somewhere in a cell, Dante was staring at concrete walls. And somewhere on a park bench, James was realizing that winter was coming. I took a deep breath. For the first time in my life, I did not feel fear. I did not feel the need to hide. I felt the pure, intoxicating weight of freedom. I had won the war, but more importantly, I had found peace. I was no longer the girl in the basement. I was the architect of my own destiny, and the view from the top was spectacular. November in Chicago was unforgiving. The wind howled through the steel canyons of the financial district, cutting through coats and stinging exposed skin. Inside the daily grind, a mid-range coffee shop on the corner of Wacker Drive, the heat was on full blast, but James still felt cold to his bones. He was wearing a stained brown apron that smelled of stale espresso and burnt milk. His hands, once manicured and soft from days spent signing useless paperwork, were now chapped and red from washing dishes without gloves. He moved mechanically between the tables, collecting empty mugs and crumpled napkins. "Excuse me, waiter," a woman in a business suit snapped, not even looking up from her laptop. "My latte is lukewarm. Take it back." James flinched. The tone was identical to the one he used to use on servers. "I am sorry, ma'am," James mumbled, staring at his worn-out shoes. "I will make a fresh one right away." He turned toward the counter, grabbing the dirty cup. As he passed the large plate glass window that looked out onto the street, a flash of movement caught his eye. A sleek, midnight blue Bentley had pulled up to the curb. It was a vehicle that screamed power, the kind of car James used to dream of leasing, but could never afford. He stopped wiping the table. He watched as the driver stepped out and opened the rear door. First, a pair of Italian leather heels hit the pavement. Then a woman emerged. She was wrapped in a camel-colored cashmere coat that looked softer than a cloud. Her hair was cut into a sharp chic bob that framed a face glowing with health and vitality. It was Riley. James felt the breath leave his lungs. The tray in his hands began to shake. She looked magnificent. She looked like she owned the city. A man stepped out from the other side of the car. He was tall, silver-haired, and distinguished. He was not a boy toy or a subordinate. He was an equal. He said something to Riley, gesturing toward the skyscraper across the street, the very building where James had once been escorted out by security. Riley threw her head back and laughed. It was a genuine, carefree sound that James realized he had never heard during their entire marriage. The man offered his arm. Riley took it, her smile radiating warmth. They looked like a partnership. They looked like the future. As they turned to walk toward the revolving doors, Riley glanced toward the coffee shop. It was a casual, fleeting look, checking her reflection in the glass. But then her eyes locked onto his. James froze. He stood there holding a tray of dirty dishes, wearing a dirty apron with a name tag that read, "Trainee." He was on display like a zoo animal in a cage of his own making. He waited for her to look angry. He waited for her to sneer, to point, to laugh at his misery. He waited for the satisfaction of being noticed. But there was nothing. Riley looked at him through the glass, and her expression did not change. There was no hate. There was no pity. There was simply no recognition. It was the way one looks at a lamppost or a parked car. She looked right through him, as if he were already a ghost. The shame hit James like a physical blow. He felt small. He felt invisible. He could not hold her gaze. He lowered his head, staring at the coffee stains on the floor, his face burning with humiliation. When he finally looked up again, she was gone. She had not paused. She had not hesitated. She had walked into the building to close another $1 million deal, leaving him behind in the cold. "Hey!" the woman with the laptop yelled. "Where is my coffee?" James swallowed the lump in his throat. He turned his back on the window and the woman he had thrown away. "Coming," he whispered. The bell on the door jingled as a new customer walked in, bringing a gust of freezing wind with them. But James knew the real chill was never going to leave him. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the city and the ghost of the man I used to call my husband. As the car ascended smoothly toward the clouds, the silence was not empty. It was full. It was heavy with the weight of everything I had carried and finally set down. For 5 years, I lived in a cage built of other people's expectations. I scrubbed floors to buy affection. I swallowed insults to keep the peace. I dimmed my own light so that James would not feel overshadowed by my shine. I thought that if I loved them hard enough, if I gave them enough of myself, they would eventually see me as a human being. But I was wrong. You cannot turn a wolf into a golden retriever by feeding it from your hand. You only teach it that you are food. Beatrice James Dante. They believed that worth was measured in decimal points. They thought that a bank account gave them the right to trample on anyone beneath them. To them, power was a loud voice and a heavy hand. They thought class was something you could buy at a jewelry store or inherit from a trust fund. They were wrong about that too. I walked out of the elevator and into my office. The morning sun flooded the room, illuminating the white orchids on my desk. I picked up a framed photo of the first woman I had given a grant to. She was smiling, holding the keys to her new bakery. That was real power. Class is not a credit limit. Class is not a designer label or a reserved table at a gala. Class is how you treat the waiter when he spills the wine. Class is how you speak to the janitor when no one is watching. Class is having the power to crush your enemies and choosing instead to simply walk away and let them destroy themselves. People ask me if I enjoyed ruining them. They assume I sit up here in my ivory tower laughing at their misery. But the truth is, I rarely think of them at all. I did not ruin James. I simply stopped saving him from his own mediocrity. I did not bankrupt Beatrice. I just stopped paying the bills for her delusions. I did not put Dante in prison. I just turned on the lights and let the world see who he really was. Revenge is not about making someone else bleed. That is messy and it stains your soul. True revenge is far more elegant. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the horizon. The lake was a vast, shimmering expanse of blue. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a life that was entirely my own. My revenge is not their suffering. My revenge is my joy. My revenge is waking up every morning without fear. My revenge is building an empire that stands on the foundation of integrity, not inheritance. My revenge is living a life so vibrant, so full of purpose and love, that they do not even exist in my peripheral vision anymore. I turned away from the window and looked directly into the camera lens. The girl who used to cry in the basement was gone. The woman standing here was untouchable. They thought they could break me. But they forgot that you cannot break a woman who has already walked through the fire and learned how to dance in the flames. I smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of absolute victory. The screen faded to black. The saga of Riley Evans and the downfall of the Beatrice dynasty serves as a brutal masterclass on the distinction between net worth and self-worth. For years, James and his mother operated under the fatal delusion that class was a commodity purchased with inheritance and enforced through cruelty. They believed that wealth granted them immunity from basic human decency. They mistook Riley's silence for submission, failing to realize that the quietest person in the room is often the most observant and the most dangerous. The true moral of this story is that money is merely a magnifying glass. It does not change who you are, it simply reveals it. For Beatrice, wealth was a weapon used to humiliate the vulnerable. For Riley, it was a tool to build a shield for herself and a ladder for others. The antagonist's ultimate failure wasn't just financial, it was a failure of character. They were so blinded by the shiny veneer of their lifestyle that they didn't see the rot in their own foundations. Riley teaches us that dignity cannot be stripped away by an insult, nor can it be bought with a title. True power does not scream for attention or demand respect through fear. It waits, it prepares, and when the time is right, it acts with precision. The most satisfying revenge is not burning your enemy's house down in anger. It is building a life so magnificent that their shadows can no longer touch you. If this story ignited a fire in you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Join our community today and never miss a moment of justice served cold.